What do you think of higher retail theft in San Francisco? Hey everybody, how's it going? I hope you're all having a lovely day. Mr. Clinton the cat has chosen to join me for today's video. Say hi, Mr. Clinton. Good boy. So, a few months ago, there was news reported that Walgreens locations were closing in San Francisco due to high theft. I was kind of curious about this, so I thought I'd look at the numbers myself to get an idea of what was actually going on. Was this propaganda or was this real? So these are the reported thefts, and the source here is the San Francisco Police Department. Thank you to the San Francisco Chronicle for making this available. So there's 5 different stores. Now, if you take a look at a store like store number 5, here it probably doesn't mean as much. Again, you have higher theft now, but you still have lower theft than what you had in 2018. For store number 4, okay, you have about twice the theft now that you did prior to 2020. I could understand it. Here, you have way higher theft in 2019 and then 2020, so you could see it kind of has that little GameStop from January of this year curve to it. It did go down in 2021, but if your mind is still kind of stuck remembering this, I could understand why they may close in spite of the fact that the data shows the crime is going down. If you're store number 1 or 2, I completely understand why you're choosing to close. Hell, I would close if it was this one. This is a GameStop January 28th chart, and there's no way in hell I would want to run a store. There's no way in hell I'd want to be the manager of store number 1. F that. I would understand that store wanting to close. Now, there are some that have said that this is because they have too many stores in a small area. And you can see over here, in this area, you have 5 different Walgreens. Maybe you don't need all of these different Walgreens in this one area. You got enough other Walgreens. And Walgreens, I believe, owns Duane Reade. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's a popular little drugstore, pharmacy kind of store in New York City. And you'll often have these stores like, just a couple of blocks away from each other. And many will wonder, do you really need that many of them? Again, the other argument could also be that they don't want this to happen. So if you're this store and you're closing, maybe it doesn't have to do with theft so much as it has to do with other factors. But if you're one of these stores, I think the data is clear that theft being on the rise is a totally valid reason to want to close. In my area, again, they're not always Walgreens. They're like Duane Reade that's owned by Walgreens or something like that. But, I'm going to take a wild guess that this thing over here does not stand for file transfer protocol. This window was broken into a couple of times last year as well. What I find interesting is that this is not just something that's happening with Walgreens, but that it's also spreading to other chains, other types of stores, other grocery stores and outlets. And I wanted to share with you a 1.5-minute video that someone linked me to on the news and just give some of my thoughts on what's going on here and also get some comments from all of you. So this here says that Safeway is installing barriers to deter thefts at a store in San Francisco.
In San Francisco tonight, shoplifting has gotten so bad at the Safeway, the Castro. KPIX5's Betty Yu shows us the store is taking some drastic action.
Customers say that they're noticing more security guards inside and outside this Safeway in the Castro, and now they're also seeing new security gates and barriers. This automatic gate closes after each person enters the store, and now these barricades make it harder for shoplifters to make a run for it. Safeway also added poles.
Yeah, that ain't gonna do shit. I think that's gonna be something that they laugh at.
To its shopping carts to make it difficult to remove from the store.
Honestly, I think it's...
Okay, the poles is an interesting one. So what they've done is they have higher ceilings inside than the size of the door. So they have these poles in the shopping carts that make it impossible for you to take the shopping cart outside of the store unless you show up there with a hacksaw and cut the poles off. But again, I think that that's just going to challenge people to, become a little bit more brazen with it. You're going to have to be a little bit more obvious that your intention is to rob the store. You can't just look like somebody that's walking out with a cart with goods that you paid for anymore. You're going to have your own bag or do this and cart stuff out. And the question is whether or not that's still going to be something that's possible.
It's probably good that they did that because there was a really bad shoplifting problem almost every single time I came here.
In late October, this particular Safeway, once open 24 hours, began closing at 9 p.m. due to rampant theft.
Lots of times there was people running and then security following or trying to stop them.
This shopper even admitted to stealing.
I think that they're not very good because I've personally been able to shoplift from here with relative ease. So
You shoplifted here?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
I've shoplifted. You've shoplifted here? While there's a camera on him. You've shoplifted here? Yeah. Now, there are people that are saying that the reason this is happening is because anything under $950 is considered a misdemeanor and the police don't really do much looking into it. Now, one thing that I think is important to preface this with is that there have been many studies showing that having a larger punishment for a crime does not necessarily keep someone from committing that crime. So, for instance, if you have a prison sentence of 6 months for crime X and you change that prison sentence from 6 months to 5 years, that's not going to deter people from committing the crime. There's lots of information and lots of data on this that if you just make it from 5 years to 15 years or 2 years to 7 years in prison, that's not going to change anything. One thing that I'm going to say, this is something I do not have data for. This is just purely me talking out of my ass. I think that if there is a difference between no punishment at all and punishment of some kind, that is going to encourage there to be more crime. Again, taking something from 6 months in prison and turning it into like 5 years in prison, probably not going to deter people because most people are not looking up what the statutes are before they do something. But I do think there's an aura in the air where people believe that they can just get away with murder, and that once people realize that, wait a second, I'm not going to get in trouble if I do this, that you're going to have a lot more people do it. Again, it's not the question of whether, how much trouble you get into, but if you're not going to get in any trouble at all, what's going to happen? And I think that you're going to wind up seeing more and more of these games of cat and mouse that stores wind up playing with the worst elements of their customer base so that they can stay in business in these areas. And I don't think it's going to be good for anybody, and I'll explain why. So, in between the first place that I lived in when I lived on my own about 12 or 13 years ago and the second one, I spent about a week and a half in a neighborhood that was not exactly what I would consider one of the best neighborhoods that New York City has to offer. It was probably one of the ones with one of the highest crime rates, but it was also incredibly cheap, and I got a place that I could live for free for about a weekend or two while I was waiting for my new apartment to be available, so I took it. And I remember walking into one of the local stores in the area. I would get my breakfast there every morning, or like my egg sandwich or turkey on a roll or whatever. And I remember seeing that some of the prices for some of the goods there were actually higher than when I would do house calls in Midtown Manhattan or the Upper West Side. And this is really confusing to me. Why is it that in an area that's filled with people who are broke, that has low rents, low cost of living, that it actually costs more money to buy a lot of basic goods than it does when I go to an area where everybody is filthy rich? So there was this guy that was sitting, there was a counter where his nephew was working, and he would make the sandwiches and ring people up. And then in the end of it, there was a guy that was looked like he was dealing with bookkeeping or whatever else. And he was an older gentleman. And I'm going to paraphrase a lot here because A, this is a 13-year-old conversation, and B, he spoke a lot of broken English. But I just kind of asked him, listen, man, I'm not complaining. I just want to make it clear I'm not complaining. I appreciate that you're here. I love getting breakfast here every day. When I do house calls for my work in like Midtown Manhattan, I noticed that a lot of the stores, the stuff's actually cheaper than here. I'm like, what's up with that? And he said, well, here's the thing. So there are times where people will walk into the store and they'll say, here, I'm taking this, you heard? I'll pay you back tomorrow. And they never come. And when then tomorrow comes, they'll say, hey, I'm taking another thing, you heard? And then he's like, what about the money from yesterday? And he's like, yo, man. And then, he kind of has a threatening demeanor towards him. And I don't know. And I don't know if they're going to take out a knife or a gun on me or whatever else. So sometimes that happens. And some, I pick my battles. I win some and I lose some. But there's a good amount of stuff that walks out of the store. And I'm not going to get that back. Now, you may think, just install cameras. That fixes it, right? And, I posted in a video that I did a few weeks ago that I was a dumbass and I left my bag someplace and somebody immediately claimed it for themselves. Now, this person who claimed my bag for themselves was on camera and did pay for their meal with a credit card. I couldn't get the footage without filing a police report. I filed a police report saying that there was over $2,000 of stuff in that bag, and they never even went to pick up the footage. So if the cops are not going to go pick up the footage when there's proof of a $2,000 theft and you've got them paying with a credit card and you've got their face clearly, do you think they're going to show up because somebody stole a Snickers bar from a bodega? Not really. So he's on his own, and that is going to increase the cost of doing business in that area. Now, when you combine that with the fact that we have this little inflationary spiral going on, whether you believe it's due to COVID policy, COVID itself, supply chain issues, the $5 to $7 trillion that we've spent over the past year and a half, people quitting their jobs via the Great Resignation, whatever you believe the causes are for inflation, we have higher prices in many areas. When you combine the higher prices with the fact that there is theft, this is most likely going to lead to more higher prices. These stores are going to make up for the fact that people are brazenly walking out with armloads full of shit by raising their prices. Now, what happens when you raise prices? When you raise prices, people who are less able to afford groceries are now going to be more incentivized to steal to make up for it. And then you just kind of keep getting this little thing that just goes on and on and on until eventually they decide, screw this, it doesn't make sense to be open in this area. There was this economics teacher I had in high school. It was, I think it was Mr. Civiletti. I honestly didn't learn much in his class. It was a very, very dry lecture, very boring, but he had us all choose some reading towards the end of the term. And I remember choosing this book that I thought was going to be absolutely boring as dirt. Basic economics, and I thought this is going to be horrible. But there was actually a lot of stuff in that book that I learned from, and it was actually fairly interesting. And one of the things that I remember being mentioned in that book is that you'll have people that say that in poor areas the stores are all evil and they rip the people off. And the reality is that there are many higher costs to doing business in some of the lower income areas. One of them is that sometimes your stuff just walks out of the store. And again, if the police are not going to walk 3 blocks over to a store to pick up footage of somebody stealing $2,000 or $3,000 worth of stuff, are they going to show up because somebody stole a bottle of mouthwash, a Snickers bar, or a pack of eggs? Not really. What winds up happening is that the prices go up. Now, when the prices go up, you're probably going to have more theft because you're going to have more people that cannot afford what is in the store. And if they see that other people are stealing brazenly, then you're going to have more of that until the store closes. When you have less stores in that particular community, less competition, higher prices overall, it's this spiral that I don't really know how you get out of. And it's sad. It really is. It's like this. I would not want to open a store in an area where you have a theft level that looks like GameStop stock from January of this year. It's just this is not conducive to somebody saying, I am going to open in that area. And you do need more places to open in an area so that you have the competition that is requisite for you to be able to get your goods affordably. I'm kind of curious what you all think. I fully understand the argument that having a greater level of punishment for a particular crime does not mean that you are going to have less people committing the crime, because the average criminal does not do their research or look it up on some .gov or .justice website or whatever, that whether or not you get a 2-year stint in prison or a 5-year stint in prison for a particular crime. That being said, I do think that there is this kind of aura in the air where people can tell. It's not the difference between 6 months in prison or 3 years in prison, but rather it's the difference between nobody gives a shit and 6 months in prison. And once you're at the area where like you're really talking about nobody gives a shit versus 6 months to 3 years in prison, I think once you get to that point, you're going to have a lot of people that otherwise would not have engaged themselves in theft at all, realizing there's no consequence. And it activates the worst, because once you get used to doing it, you're going to do it again and again and again and again. You know, and to be clear, I don't want to make the argument that software piracy and stealing from a store are the same thing, but this reminds me of something that Eli, the computer guy, had said about 8 or 9 years ago. He was talking about businesses that wind up getting screwed over by the Business Software Alliance for using pirated software. He was saying, you know, you'll have somebody that is 13 years old that literally they don't have any money. They don't even have a debit card or a credit card or a bank. So even if they make money from some side job, they can't spend it online in the way that they'd like to. So they just pirate software. And then when they're 17 or 19, well, they have a bank account and a credit card, but they're broke. So they pirate the software. And then when they start a business, it's like, well, you know, I'm already registered on this torrent site and I'd rather save the money for something else. So they pirate the software. And then they have 10 employees and they pirate the software. And then once they have 100 employees, because they've always pirated the software, because that's what they're used to doing, they just pirate it again. And then once they fire somebody that they had a bad relationship with, that person reports them, they get in trouble for having pirated software, and then they get some sort of $100,000 fine, even though they were at the point when they can actually afford it. And again, I don't want to make the comparison between pirating software and stealing from a store. That's not my intention. My intention is to just kind of make an analogy to what he was talking about with regards to the mindset. Once you get normal, average, everyday people who are dealing with an inflationary spiral, who are dealing with their grocery costs and costs of living going out of control, who are dealing with their housing costs going up, used to the idea that when I go into the store, the stuff that used to be $3, it's now $5. Damn, that sucks. If I take it, nobody's really going to care. When they do that once and they get away with it and they see that there's really no consequence, you've kind of taken a normal person and you're slowly inculcating them into becoming a criminal. And I think that there is a cost to the overall society for that. When you've got to the point where somebody will admit into a publicly published on television news channel, yes, I steal from this store, what effect does that have on the overall society? How does that then encourage normal, average, everyday people that would have never taken anything at all to say, you know what? Let me try my luck with $3 worth of stuff. Let me try my luck with $10 worth of stuff. Let me try my luck next week with $100 worth of stuff and see where it goes from there. There is a cost when normal, average, everyday people realize, A, I have an incentive to break the law because everything's getting more expensive, but B, I can do it and I can get away with it. I think it is going to wind up screwing over honest, everyday people that actually want to pay their bills, because those people are then going to show up at the store and see the prices are higher and higher and higher. Eventually, they decide, screw this, I'm done with this altogether. They leave, and then you wind up with the less honest people left behind. What happens then? What's the future of this? I'm very curious. I'm always interested in reading about what is going on here and also looking at the data, because I have this, call it an intuition, that when I read about San Francisco, I'm just kind of looking down the pipeline for what's going to happen here in the next 2 to 5 years. And I'm very curious to see how this goes. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I know, Clinton. You have anything to say, Mr. Clinton, before we end the video? What do you think of higher retail theft in San Francisco? I know. Clinton? All right. See you all in the next one.